Beneath the sterile glow of first-class lighting, he hadn't even reached his seat before the silent verdict began. A black man in a tailored suit, elegant, commanding, unmistakably confident, and somehow that alone made the nearby flight attendant pause and the rest of the cabin quietly cast their assumptions. No one asked his name. No one questioned the sharpness in her voice. They just watched, passively complicit, as she began to peel away his dignity layer by layer, masked as standard procedure. What they didn't know was that the man they'd just misjudged wasn't just another seat assignment. He was the moment Justice boarded in silence, settled into seat 1A, and waited. And if this story stops you mid-scroll, tap like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Have you ever witnessed someone treated like they didn't belong just because of who they are? And where are you watching from? We read everything. The airport pulsed with its usual rhythm, suitcases rolling like soft percussion, boarding announcements echoing against glass walls, and the mingling scents of fresh leather and jet fuel drifting through the terminal. At Gate C1, reserved for the airline's most elite clientele, the mood was hushed, almost ceremonial. Malik Hartwell approached the velvet barrier with the kind of quiet assurance that came only from years of proving himself in rooms that never expected him. His slate-gray suit fit like intention, sharply tailored, paired with a navy tie that whispered elegance rather than shouted wealth. No ostentation, no jewelry, just presence. As he reached the front, a few first-class passengers glanced up with mild curiosity, then looked away. But not Avery Sloan, the lead attendant for Flight 388. Avery stood like a gatekeeper, posture rigid, smile reserved. She scanned the boarding pass in Malik's hand, then lifted her gaze sharply to meet his. She didn't smile. Her lips twitched, barely. A smirk maybe, if it hadn't been so carefully contained. "First class sure lets in all kinds these days," she muttered. Not to him, but just loud enough for the younger attendant beside her to hear. She plucked the scanner from its cradle. A soft beep confirmed his seat. "Mr. Hart," she said, voice flat, avoiding eye contact. She stepped aside with a motion that wasn't welcoming, just allowing, like a bouncer waving in someone they didn't think should be at the club. Malik's expression didn't shift. He gave a courteous nod, adjusted the leather strap on his shoulder bag, and stepped down the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin shimmered with quiet luxury, glossy wood accents, champagne-toned seats, and soft amber lights meant to mimic a sunset you could never quite touch. He found 1A, just as printed. As he reached up to stow his carry-on, his hand barely brushed the handle before Avery Sloan appeared beside him. "You'll need to keep that with you," she said, crisp and clipped. "Overhead bins are already closed." Malik blinked calmly. He looked up at the wide-open, entirely empty bin above him. "Boarding hasn't finished," he replied evenly. "I was just, sir," she interrupted, tone sharpening. "Regulation state bins close 10 minutes before final cabin prep. Please stow it under your seat." Before he could reply, she reached above his head and slammed the bin shut, hard. The thud cracked the quiet like a warning shot. He paused, considered saying something, then exhaled. Quietly. With no argument, he shifted the bag to his lap. It was heavy, not oversized, but definitely not comfortable for a long-haul flight. Inside were his laptop and investor presentation, things you don't leave at your feet with soda cans and snack trays looming. Still, he said nothing. Satisfied, Avery turned and strode toward the galley. Chin high, pace brisk, authority unchecked. A moment later, another passenger stepped aboard, a white man, mid-50s, in linen pants and boat shoes, tugging along a full-size roller bag. "Whoops, cutting it close, huh?" The man chuckled, winded. Avery's entire demeanor changed. She beamed. "Not a problem at all, Mr. Langford," she said warmly. "Here, let me help you." She opened an overhead bin 2 rows back, still empty, and gently lifted the man's suitcase inside. Malik watched silently, his jaw tensed. But he said nothing. He adjusted the bag on his lap, its leather edge pressing against his thighs. Around him, champagne glasses clinked softly as more passengers trickled in. He knew this flavor of discrimination. Not loud, not brutal, but polished, professional, scripted. She lifted the man's suitcase with ease, sliding it into the overhead compartment 2 rows back, still empty, still open. Her hands moved with practiced confidence, her smile effortless. Malik Hartwell watched the exchange in silence, jaw tightening, but his face remained composed. He leaned back into his seat, adjusting the weight of his carry-on, which still rested heavily on his lap. The leather edge bit faintly into his legs. Around him, first-class passengers trickled in, speaking softly, sipping complimentary champagne, laughing beneath the muted hum of wealth. The gap in treatment wasn't shocking. It never was. He'd lived this version of exclusion before. Not loud, not aggressive, but clinical, dressed in protocol, backed by silence. This wasn't about dress code. His tailored look was flawless. Not about tardiness. He had arrived early. Not even about seat assignment. 1A was clearly printed on his boarding pass. But to Avery Sloan, none of that mattered. He still didn't belong. His phone vibrated. A message from his executive assistant. Figures confirmed. Investor briefing locked for 9 a.m. EST. He typed a quick reply with one hand. The other remained on the leather case nestled between his knees, a case containing everything for tomorrow's pitch. Slides, forecasts, contracts, precision, and preparation. The things that kept him 10 steps ahead, in rooms that barely wanted him in the first place. As he hit send, his gaze drifted across the aisle and met the eyes of a middle-aged woman draped in pearls and a pale cream shawl. She stared for a beat too long, then looked away without acknowledgement. He didn't need her sympathy. But the stare stayed with him. Avery Sloan reappeared, strolling the aisle in her crisp uniform, scanning seats and faces. When she reached Malik, her eyes lingered a second longer, like she was confirming a prediction, not checking a name. She didn't speak, didn't offer a towel or a drink, as she had for others, just moved on. Malik had been quiet throughout boarding, centering himself despite the pressure of his bag, despite the way the memory of that slamming bin played on repeat in his mind. He knew what kind of flight this was becoming, the kind where dignity leaks away slowly, like cabin pressure, the kind where injustice dresses in navy blazers and polite smiles. As the aircraft began to taxi, Malik shifted in his seat, adjusting the case wedged against him. His lower back already strained from the awkward posture. He leaned slightly to one side, and there she was again. Avery crouched beside him, clipboard in hand, face drawn into a mask of concern. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, her voice pitched just high enough for nearby passengers to hear. "We've been alerted to a malfunction in the panel at seat 1A. It seems the recline feature is jammed. For safety, I'll need to move you." Malik blinked. "It's fine," he said calmly. "I don't need to recline. I'll manage." Her lips twitched, not out of empathy, but challenge. "I'm afraid this isn't optional," she cut in. "FAA guidelines require functional equipment for takeoff in first class. Please come with me." She didn't wait for agreement, didn't ask his preference. She just turned and walked. With a quiet sigh, Malik rose, hoisting the carry-on that now felt twice as heavy. He followed, each step echoing a quiet humiliation. She didn't stop at business class. She didn't stop at row 5. She led him to row 7C, an aisle seat adjacent to the lavatory, where the scent of antiseptic clung to the air like regret. "We'll do our best to return you to your original seat after takeoff," she lied smoothly, handing him a flimsy pair of plastic-wrapped earbuds, not the noise-canceling set he'd been given in first class. Malik said nothing. He sat, tucked his bag into the cramped space beneath the seat, and stared forward, breathing slowly through his nose. The tightness in his chest had nothing to do with altitude. People passed him, some curious, some indifferent, no one empathetic. His seat screen flickered with static. The tray table stuck. The overhead vent rattled and wouldn't close. None of it warranted a complaint. But none of it was the point. It was never about the seat. A junior attendant rolled a cart down the aisle, smiling softly as she served pre-selected meals. The scent of lemon-glazed chicken and seared salmon drifted warmly through the cabin. Malik, who hadn't eaten all day, adjusted his collar and sat straighter, trying not to seem eager. But when the attendant reached his row, she paused, consulted her list, and shook her head gently. "I'm sorry, sir," she said. "Hot meals are only served through row 5. For rows 6 and above, we have this." She lowered a tray of finger sandwiches, dry crackers, cucumbers, and a paper-thin sliver of cheese. Malik looked at the tray with disbelief, then back at her. He nodded once. "Thank you." He unfolded the napkin. He took a bite, chewed slowly, swallowed the insult along with the sandwich. He hadn't eaten since sunrise. Malik Hartwell shifted slightly in his seat, adjusting his collar, trying to distract himself from the dull ache in his stomach. When the meal cart reached his row, the young attendant paused, checked her manifest, and offered an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, sir. This row isn't included in the hot meal service," she said gently, placing a tray of cold finger sandwiches on his table. "It's standard policy for seating below row 5. Malik looked down at the unremarkable offering: dry crackers, pale cucumbers, and a single curled slice of turkey. His expression didn't change, but a flicker of disbelief passed through his eyes. He didn't argue, didn't protest, just unfolded the napkin with careful fingers and began to eat. Each bite felt less like sustenance and more like a message. "You don't belong here." His phone buzzed. A reminder from his associate. "Doc still needs signature before landing." He opened his laptop, connected to the airline's Wi-Fi portal, and entered the access code printed on his original first-class boarding pass. Nothing. He tried again. Still no connection. As Avery Sloan passed, he raised a hand slightly, his voice steady. "Excuse me," he said, "the Wi-Fi code on my ticket isn't working. Could you check if there's an updated one?" She leaned in slightly, her expression unchanged, polite, paper-thin. "That code is reserved for verified first-class passengers, Mr. Hartwell," she replied coolly. "It's possible your reassignment hasn't synced with the system. Unfortunately, I can't authorize access from row 7. He met her gaze, calm, direct. "I was moved from seat 1A. "I understand," she interrupted smoothly. "But your current cabin class doesn't include premium internet access. I'm sure your company will understand the delay." She turned before he could respond, her posture unbothered, already halfway down the aisle. Malik stared at the blinking cursor on the login screen, a small, cruel symbol of control denied. He closed the laptop slowly, hands resting on the cover for a moment, not out of anger, but out of something heavier. A growing awareness that none of this was accidental. The curtain at the front of the cabin remained drawn tight, a barrier between privilege and pretense. Beyond it, faint laughter floated back, glass clinking, silverware on ceramic, conversations too comfortable to imagine. Here, in row 7C, sandwich crumbs clung to a flimsy napkin. A laptop sat useless. A stale air vent blew down from above, just enough to chill. The injustice didn't live in what had been denied. It lived in how easily they assumed he shouldn't have had it to begin with. A man across the aisle glanced at him. A quick nod. Then he looked away, embarrassed by his own impulse to show empathy. Malik returned the gesture with a thin, hollow smile. He wasn't looking for pity. He was looking for dignity. And at 35,000 feet, it was slipping further below sea level. As the plane picked up speed for takeoff, cabin lights dimmed. Engines hummed to life. The briefcase between his feet dug sharply into his legs now, and the sandwich sat half-eaten on the tray. The water he'd been given tasted metallic, as if poured straight from a hose behind the galley curtain. He stopped checking his phone. There was no connection, no emails, no progress, just stillness and a growing pressure in his chest. He focused on the engine noise, trying to breathe evenly. Then came a shift, a whisper behind him, a clipped tone, a glance in his direction. He couldn't make out the words, but he didn't have to. The energy had changed. Moments later, as the seatbelt lights flickered on, a uniformed crew member appeared beside his row. The man wore a discreet security badge. "Mr. Hartwell?" the man asked, voice low but firm. Malik straightened slightly. "Yes?" The officer gave a curt nod. "We received a note about a potentially unidentified electronic device in your possession. For safety reasons, we'll need to verify the contents before takeoff." The words didn't register at first. Malik frowned, confused. "I don't have anything unusual, just my laptop and phone." "Understood," the man replied. "Still, we'd appreciate your cooperation." Malik opened his briefcase slowly. Inside, a MacBook Pro, a charger, a USB drive, a folder of printed pitch materials. All standard, all professional, all ordinary. The officer inspected each item, calm and methodical. Then he gestured for Malik to power on the laptop. It booted up normally. The desktop showed an open spreadsheet. Nothing hidden, nothing suspicious. The officer nodded. "Thank you for your cooperation, sir. Apologies for the disruption." He moved on, disappearing down the aisle. Malik sat still for a long moment, then turned his head slightly toward the front of the plane. Avery Sloane stood there, arms crossed, watching. Their eyes met. She didn't look surprised, didn't look sorry. She looked satisfied. That's when he knew. She had filed the report. The spreadsheet still glowed faintly on the screen, a neat column of forecasts and figures from earlier that morning. Malik Hartwell's world, reduced now to muted pixels beneath orange juice stains and judgment. The officer gave a final nod. "Thank you for your cooperation, sir. Apologies for the disruption." Malik offered a polite nod and watched the man walk away. Then, slowly, he turned toward the front of the cabin, toward the curtain and the figure standing just beyond it. Avery Sloane, arms folded, gaze fixed. Their eyes met only briefly, but it was long enough. There was no relief on her face, no apology, only satisfaction. That's when the truth hit. She had filed the report. There had been no complaint, no strange behavior, no raised voices or forgotten bags. She hadn't responded to a threat. She had invented one, and now it had done its job. Isolation. Delay. A stain that wouldn't show up on any official form, but would linger in the minds of everyone who watched it unfold. The plane lifted into the air, his seat rattling faintly with turbulence. Beside him, the man who hadn't spoken a word since boarding now leaned ever so slightly away, as if the inspection had marked Malik radioactive. The hum of mistrust was louder than the engines. 40 minutes passed. Then the intercom crackled to life. Warm, familiar, fake. "Good evening, valued guests," came the voice of Avery Sloane, sweetened with years of practiced cheer. "We'd like to recognize a few of our loyal travelers on today's flight." She began with someone in 2B. "To our returning Platinum Elite member, Mr. Charles Henley, welcome back. Thank you for choosing us again." Soft applause rose from the forward cabin. Then she paused. "And a special shout-out to Mr. Morris, seated in our standard cabin, who was upgraded to our premium section today due to an internal seating adjustment. We hope you enjoy the flight, Mr. Morris." Malik froze. Morris? Not Hartwell, not first-class guest, not thank you for your loyalty, just a generic label, a made-up name, a public reframing. The announcement wasn't a welcome, it was a dismissal, a carefully disguised rebuke. Behind him, a few passengers chuckled softly. Someone leaned toward their neighbor and whispered, "Guess someone got lucky." The man beside Malik, who had been silent for hours, suddenly had the nerve to ask, "Did they really bump you up?" Malik didn't answer, didn't blink, just stared ahead at the seatback screen, now showing, "Welcome, guest." His name was gone, replaced, erased, invisible by design. The worst part wasn't the mistake. It was the intent. Avery Sloane hadn't stumbled. She hadn't misread. She had deliberately taken the last thing he had control over, his identity, and stripped it from him, just as she had taken his seat, his meal, his access. The humiliation wasn't a side effect. It was the point. A tightness pulled at his throat, but he swallowed it back. He wouldn't let her see it. Not here. Not now. But deep inside, something coiled. Anger, long restrained, now curdled into a quiet ache. This wasn't the first time he'd been underestimated, but it was the first time the attack had been so deliberate, so orchestrated. He looked down at his hands, clenched tight on the armrest, knuckles pale from tension. He released them slowly, like someone reminding himself what it costs to keep peace in a world that prefers him silent. From the front, laughter echoed, high, careless, sharp, the kind that stings more because it wasn't meant to be private. He heard it before he saw the source, a cluster of voices just behind the thin curtain separating first-class comfort from everyone else. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to shield a fragment of himself, a moment of stillness in a sky full of quiet cruelty. But then, "Who's in 7C?" a man asked, his voice loud with amusement. "Looks like my Uber driver finally made it into the cabin." More laughter. Unfiltered. Cruel. Then came Avery's voice, light, playful. "Oh, don't say that," she giggled. "He's probably just testing out what it feels like to ride in the back for once." The group erupted again. They didn't see Malik, but he could hear them, the teeth behind the smiles, the ease with which they mocked, certain no one would stop them. He didn't move, didn't turn, didn't speak. He sat frozen in his narrow seat. The air felt colder now, as if even the vent above had joined the cruelty. His hands rested on his knees, trembling slightly beneath the pressure of restraint. They hadn't meant for him to hear it, but they didn't care if he did. The vent above blew steadily, but it felt colder now, as if it had been turned up just to match the frost creeping into Malik Hartwell's chest. His hands were pressed to his knees, knuckles tight, jaw clenched, not out of rage, but to hold back the tremble of humiliation. The joke hadn't been aimed directly at him, but it had landed anyway. It had burrowed in, and it stayed. An attendant passed by. She didn't look at him, not even a glance. The man beside him let out a fake cough, the universal sign of forced avoidance. No one said anything. The plane had become a theater, and Malik was the unnamed extra in someone else's punchline. He tried to breathe through his nose, counting quietly, grounding himself the way he'd learned to do in boardrooms, where silence often followed him, until it was time to sign a deal. Later, Avery Sloane returned. She was carrying a tray with small cups of water, gliding down the aisle like nothing had happened. When she reached his row, she stopped. She tilted her head with feigned curiosity, like she was trying to place him in a puzzle that didn't make sense. "You're from business class, right?" she asked, tapping her tablet. "No. Wait, crew jump seat?" Her tone was playful, like she was trying to make it a joke. Something harmless. Something small. Malik looked at her, eyes steady but hollow. "First class," he said, voice quiet but firm. "Seat 1A. Reassigned for mechanical failure." Avery blinked, too quickly for sincerity, then let out a shallow laugh. "Oh, right," she said. "You're the one with the seat mix-up. Sorry about that. It's been a long day." Her eyes said something else entirely. Not fatigue. Something closer to mockery wrapped in civility. Malik took the glass she handed him and placed it on the tray. It was lukewarm. He didn't drink it. Time passed. Or maybe it stalled. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, transitioning into cruise mode. The overhead screens flickered with preloaded movies. Around him, the gentle murmur of entertainment buzzed. But Malik didn't reach for his remote. didn't care what was playing. He stared at the safety card in the seat pocket. The bright illustrations felt absurd. Emergency exits, flotation devices, oxygen masks. Nothing about how to survive being dehumanized at 35,000 feet. He had built a career on calm, on control, on enduring subtle humiliations without reacting. But today felt different, sharper, quieter, like every word, every omission, every fake smile was part of a silent test he never agreed to take. Avery passed again. This time she was offering coffee to the rows behind him, smiling, pleasant, in control. When she reached his row, she paused, tilted her head. "Can I get you anything, Mr.?" She let the word hang, pretending to check her tablet. "Sorry, I forgot your name again." She had said it when he boarded. She had seen it when the security officer confirmed his ID. She had repeated the wrong version of it over the intercom. She knew exactly who he was. The forgetfulness wasn't a slip. It was strategy. A way to say, "You don't matter here." Malik answered anyway. "Hartwell," he said quietly. "Malik Hartwell." His voice didn't shake, but it didn't carry weight either. It was like reciting a passcode no longer recognized by the system. Avery smiled again, that empty customer service smile, and moved on without writing it down. The seat felt smaller by the hour. His back ached from the rigid posture. The air vent still wouldn't close, and the scent of disinfectant from the lavatory beside him was starting to sour. No longer sterile, just stale. It felt deliberate, as if the design of this corner of the plane conspired to shrink him down inch by inch, no matter how upright he sat, no matter how quiet he stayed. It didn't seem to matter. Later, a different flight attendant passed, taller, quieter, unfamiliar. Malik raised a hand gently. "Do you have any pillows left?" His voice was low. "Careful." The attendant blinked. "We ran out in first class," she said automatically, then paused. "I mean, you're not on the manifest for a pillow." "Sorry." She walked away before he could respond. The plane may have reached cruising altitude, but for Malik it felt like free fall. Every hour chipped away at something. Comfort, dignity, even anonymity. After the jokes, the fake forgetfulness, the cold meals, and cold stares, he gave up speaking. Silence became a shield. Stillness, a survival tactic. He kept his back straight, eyes forward, breath controlled, but the pressure wasn't from the altitude. It was in the air around him, heavier now, sour. Suspicion had become airborne. He noticed it in the looks. From passengers who stared a second too long, blinked a second too slowly, as if trying to figure out what kind of man causes this much tension by simply existing. The stares weren't aggressive. They were calibrated. Some passengers peeked over their tablets. Others glanced sideways, blinking just a second too slow. It wasn't disgust or fear. It was curiosity wrapped in suspicion. They were trying to answer a silent question. What kind of man creates this much unease without making a sound? Malik Hartwell didn't know what had changed so suddenly, but behind the galley curtain, Avery Sloane had been busy. She'd been whispering, just loud enough for selected ears. To one passenger she leaned in, her voice dipped in sympathy. He was flagged during boarding. Nothing violent, just intense. To another she sighed, lowering her voice. "I'm not at liberty to say too much, but TSA nearly held him up during screening. There was something. It wasn't an accusation. It was a suggestion. A seed, expertly sown. Passengers were bored. They were looking for drama, and Avery gave them a narrative. The word flagged did its job. So did incident. They didn't ask for proof. They didn't need it. What they needed was a story that made their discomfort feel reasonable. Malik could feel the shift. Even if no one had said anything to his face, the energy around him had curdled. The man across the aisle, who'd given a polite nod earlier, now sat with arms crossed, body angled away. A woman in the next row clutched her handbag tighter when she stood up. The tension spread like static through recycled air. Even the crew's demeanor had shifted. Fewer glances, less warmth, colder eyes. An hour later, the pilot's voice broke through the quiet hum. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently addressing a minor issue with the cabin pressure monitor. Beverage service will resume shortly. Thank you for your patience." Routine, technical, forgettable. Most passengers barely noticed, but then Avery Sloane appeared again, this time moving with more urgency. Her steps clipped, her presence sharper. She stopped just near Malik's row. Her voice was professional, but carefully amplified, meant to carry. "Apologies for the delay," she announced, "but we're currently addressing a disturbance that occurred during boarding." She didn't look at him, not directly, but her eyes flicked, quick and deliberate, in his direction. Some guests may have noticed earlier tension with a passenger who refused to comply with seat procedures. That delay has impacted our service timeline today. She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. Every head turned, not with curiosity this time, but with quiet, accusatory confirmation. Malik sat still, frozen in a lie he hadn't written, but now had to live with. His lips parted slightly as if to object, but what could he say? That it wasn't true, that he'd done nothing wrong. It didn't matter. The script was already finished. He was no longer a man. He was a problem. Someone behind him coughed and muttered, "Figures." Another leaned to their companion and said, knew something was off when he got on. The man across the aisle, who hours ago had made room, now leaned toward a flight attendant. "If it escalates, are you going to restrain him?" The attendant, startled, hesitated. "Everything's under control, sir." Malik clenched his jaw. He looked down at his hands, fingers laced tightly in his lap, knuckles pale. A sharp ache ran from his neck to the base of his spine. He wanted to stand, to shout, to demand correction, to say, "Pull up my reservation, check my credentials, call your CEO. I helped save this company." But he didn't, because he knew what they'd see. Not a shareholder, not a strategist, not a leader, just an angry black man raising his voice in a confined space. And that was all they needed to believe the lie even more. The worst part wasn't the fabrication. It was that they wanted it to be true. It gave them something to validate the unease of seeing someone like him in a seat they still believed should be earned through lineage, not leadership. Across the aisle, a child asked his mother with innocent volume, "Mom, is that the man who got in trouble?" The woman hushed him quickly, her eyes already fixed on Malik, cold, protective, as if something might happen. Then the curtain between cabins rustled. A young flight attendant emerged, dark slacks, hesitant steps. His name tag read Devon. He spotted Malik, paused. There was a flicker of something, recognition, maybe concern. He stepped forward, about to speak. But Avery was already there. She appeared like a shadow, a hand gently on his shoulder, lips moving in a whisper. Devon's eyes dropped to the floor. He didn't say a word. He didn't come back. Devon's eyes flicked once more toward Malik Hartwell, filled with something like regret. But then Avery Sloane leaned in. She placed a hand on his shoulder, whispered something softly, intimately, and steered him back behind the curtain. He didn't return, and with that, the last glimmer of allyship vanished. The tension had thickened to something almost physical now, coating Malik's skin like a second layer. A film of judgment, of quiet threat. Every whispered comment stung like a paper cut. Every sideways glance landed like a pebble in his collarbone. He had stopped shifting. Even adjusting his posture felt dangerous now. Movement attracted attention, and attention only brought more humiliation. In just a few hours, he had learned how to disappear while sitting in plain sight. His laptop still rested on the tray in front of him, screen dimmed, battery nearly drained. The document he needed to sign, a simple investor agreement, still sat open. It should have taken 2 minutes, just a few taps. A final signature to close the deal before landing, but the Wi-Fi had never worked. The seat was crammed. The silence had grown unbearable. Still, this task remained, a final thread connecting him to the world outside this aircraft, to his dignity, to his worth. And then Avery Sloane came down the aisle again. No words, just her hands on the drink cart, face blank. She served the rows ahead with her usual practiced grace. Cups here, a napkin there, smiles measured and smooth. When she reached his row, she paused. Her eyes flicked to his screen, saw the document, the open laptop. She offered a tight, professional nod. Nothing more. She didn't move on. Instead, she reached for a plastic cup with one hand and, with the other, casually grabbed a bottle of orange juice from the cart. Except, as she turned to pour, her elbow jerked. A subtle, deliberate nudge. The tray jolted. The bottle tipped. A stream of orange arced in the air, a silent bullet, and landed squarely across his keyboard. Malik inhaled sharply, not loud, not angry, just the sound of a man watching something essential slip away. "Oh," Avery said flatly, voice heavy with mock surprise. "I'm so sorry. She didn't reach for napkins, didn't kneel, didn't help. She simply stood there, waiting." Malik instinctively tilted the laptop, trying to drain the juice. Sticky liquid ran between the keys. The screen flickered, dimmed. His chest tightened. Another flight attendant walked past. Malik raised his hand. "Could I get something dry? Paper towels?" His voice remained calm. The attendant blinked, startled, then nodded and disappeared into the galley. Avery didn't move. "It was an accident," she said before he could speak. The cart slipped. She was still standing, watching. Watching not out of concern, but as if grading his reaction. Malik didn't accuse. He didn't argue. Instead, he asked quietly, "Do you have a replacement device? A tablet? Anything? I need to sign something before landing." She raised an eyebrow as if he'd asked for something absurd. "Replacement device?" she echoed. "Sir, those are reserved for premium passengers, verified through our corporate tier." Malik stared at her. "I was seated in 1A, he said. "You reassigned me. This isn't about perks. It's about necessity." She folded her arms. "Policy doesn't change with reassignment," she replied, her voice cold, clinical. "And from what I can tell, you've not been verified financially. Those devices are reserved for authenticated business accounts." There it was again, that scalpel of language, not poor, not unqualified, just unverified. He looked at her, not with fury, but with the full weight of everything she had taken. His seat, his access, his name, now his work. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. This moment, this collapse, was one she had curated brick by brick, slight by slight. The attendant returned with a stack of napkins, silently handing them over. Malik took them. "Thank you," he whispered. He began dabbing the keyboard, watching sticky juice seep from between the keys. It was no use. The laptop was finished. Across the aisle, passengers watched again. Only now, the curiosity had shifted into confirmation. The man who delayed the flight, the one who couldn't manage his own electronics, the one who got flagged. The narrative had taken root, and now it bloomed. Malik closed the laptop slowly, the keys clinging together, soft, wet echoes of professionalism unraveling. He set it aside, back straight, face still. But something inside had snapped. The laptop sat beside him now, closed, useless, its sticky keys a graveyard of the deal he wouldn't sign. Malik Hartwell wiped his palms on his slacks and leaned back in his seat. Outwardly, he was composed, still, silent, contained. But inside, he was crumbling. He had built a company from the ground up, 4 states, multiple teams, multi-million-dollar mergers. He'd spoken on ethics panels, led innovation initiatives, mentored young minds in boardrooms across the country. None of it followed him here. None of it mattered in Seat 7C. Here, he was just the man who spilled something, who got flagged, who couldn't even secure a device to finish his work. He watched Avery Sloane disappear toward the back of the plane, pushing her cart with the same crisp efficiency she'd used all flight. No apology, no acknowledgement, no remorse. His jaw tightened. His dignity wasn't just bruised, it was soaked, sticky, and quietly dying on the motherboard of a machine that had once carried his authority. Outside, the sky had turned gold, then deepened into a bruised blue. Sunset crept through the cabin windows in streaks. Malik didn't look. He didn't open the in-flight magazine, didn't glance at the entertainment screen. He stared straight ahead, replaying the scene again and again. Not to make sense of it, but because the ache of powerlessness was louder than his thoughts. He imagined the unsent email, the unsigned contract, the moment his team would check their notifications and realize his silence. And wonder, did we do something wrong? He imagined how many times he'd over-prepared, over-delivered, over-performed, just to be allowed in the room, and how a bottle of juice and a lie could erase all of it. He shifted to one side, away from the lavatory door that had opened and closed half a dozen times in the last 30 minutes. Each time, it puffed out the same mix of cleaning fluid and recycled air that now seemed to coat him. The conversation around the cabin had dulled into low murmurs, but the judgment, it still hung in the air like turbulence, unseen, but always waiting. What Malik didn't know was that the whispers had metastasized. Somewhere behind the curtain, inside the crew's private messaging thread, meant for logistics and emergency codes, something had been posted. A photo. Grainy, unflattering, taken without permission. It showed Malik, slouched slightly, jaw clenched, orange-stained tray in view. His laptop, visibly damaged, dripped onto the corner of his seat. The caption read, CEO Energy. Budget Reality. Gotta love the cosplay. A laughing emoji followed. Then a thumbs up. Then a meme. Someone wiping away fake tears. It had been Jonah, the junior flight attendant, who took it, young, eager to impress. Avery had whispered in the galley, if he's going to act like he owns the plane, might as well get the shot. So Jonah had snapped it, thinking it harmless, funny even. When the crew reacted with laughter piling on, his brief flicker of hesitation disappeared. No one told him to delete it. No one told him it crossed the line. So it stayed, a quiet reinforcement of the lie they were all now part of. Malik didn't know about the photo, but he felt the shift. When Jonah passed his row again, the look on his face had changed. No longer awkward sympathy, but amused detachment. The look people give when they think they're in on the joke. Malik didn't speak. He had nothing left to say that anyone would listen to. But inside, the storm had turned, not explosive, but dense. A heat rising behind his ribs that didn't come from anger alone. It came from loss. Layer by layer they had stripped him. His seat, his name, his food, his access, his tools. Now even his privacy had been stolen, all under the guise of policy, all beneath the polished smile of hospitality. He closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. His heart beat steadily, but not softly. It pounded like it was trying to remind him, you still matter, even if they won't see it. An hour passed. The captain's voice came through the speakers, announcing initial descent. The cabin lights flickered. Passengers stretched, gathered blankets, checked their phones. Malik didn't move. His tray was locked, his bag still beneath the seat. He sat still, quiet, dignified in his silence. And then she returned. Avery Sloane, one last pass down the aisle, clipboard in hand. Voice sharper now, posture straighter. She stopped beside his seat, and this time she didn't pretend. She returned for the final time. Clipboard in hand, posture stiff, tone colder than ever. Avery Sloane stood beside Malik Hartwell, not leaning down, not softening her voice, but addressing him in the same clipped, condescending cadence she'd wielded since takeoff. Mr. Hartwell, she began, we've received multiple guest complaints regarding confrontational behavior during the flight. Before we begin our descent, let me be very clear. Any further disruptions will lead to immediate escalation. She read the warning like a script. This includes speaking to other passengers without their consent, interfering with crew responsibilities, or attempting to enter restricted areas of the cabin. Do you understand? Malik turned to her slowly, his voice calm but lined with quiet steel. I haven't spoken to anyone. I haven't caused a scene. I've only asked for what I paid for. He paused, measured, then added, I'd like to speak with your supervisor. That should have been a simple request, but Avery's face twisted slightly, like he'd committed an act of defiance. I'm the lead on this flight, she snapped, and if you continue to challenge protocol, I'll alert ground security. You'll be removed upon landing. The threat hung in the air, sharp, loud, final. Malik's stomach tightened. This wasn't just dismissal now, it was criminalization. With one call, she could mark him as a danger. With one glance, she could turn the narrative completely. He leaned back, a muscle twitching in his cheek as he reined in the fire rising in his chest. He nodded. Once. Wordlessly. Avery gave no acknowledgement, just turned and strode away down the aisle. As the plane began its slow descent, Malik turned his face toward the oval window. Outside, the city glittered below, a web of gold stretching across the dark like constellations. Each light represented a life, moving forward, unaware that above them, at 30,000 feet, a man sat erasing himself just to survive a flight. He thought of the deal that would go unsigned, the team waiting on a file that would never arrive, the story now circling him like smoke, one he couldn't control. He imagined the questions they'd ask about him once they landed. Was he difficult? Why was he reassigned? What really happened on that flight? The answers wouldn't matter. The assumptions had already taken root. But a few rows ahead in 2A, someone stirred. Elias Monroe, a soft-spoken man in his mid-60s, glanced up from the book in his lap. He'd been quiet all flight, observing, letting the noise wash over him. But something about Avery's sharp tone, her final sweep through the cabin, snapped him out of the blur. He tilted his head, squinting toward the back of the plane. There was something familiar. The posture, the suit, the calm tension in Malik's face. It sparked something in his memory. He turned toward the window, adjusting for the reflection, trying to catch a clearer look. And then, softly to himself, wait a minute. I've seen him before. He pulled out his phone and flipped to his photo album. Past vacations, work events, a conference in Seattle. Then, a moment frozen in pixels. A gala, 6 months ago. Skylux Airlines event, San Francisco. A banner read, 2024 Strategic Equity Restructure, powered by people there. Standing on stage beside the company's CEO, Imani Sterling, was Malik Hartwell, shaking hands, smiling, leading the conversation. Elias's eyes widened. He turned to the young executive seated beside him. Look, he whispered, showing the photo. That's him. That's Malik Hartwell. He gave the keynote at the Skylux Gala. He's one of the lead investors behind the airline's post-pandemic recovery. The younger man blinked, leaning closer. Wait, Hartwell? You mean the guy from Forbes, Aviation 100, Top 40 under 40? Elias nodded slowly, voice low but certain. He's not just an investor. He's the reason this airline's still flying. The information spread like sparks through dry air. Whispers turned to murmurs. One passenger pulled up his podcast app. That's him. He did that interview on corporate equity and accessibility in aviation. Another searched his name on Google Images. Malik Hartwell. Roar Group, board advisor, strategic funding partner. It's really him. Eyes turned, carefully at first, then openly. The same eyes that had looked past him now stared, not with judgment, but with a dawning sense of guilt. The story they thought they knew had just cracked open. They had watched a man be humiliated, stripped down by petty authority, and said nothing. Now they realized he had built the very cabin they were sitting in, What had once been suspicion now swelled into recognition, confusion morphing into guilt. Phones buzzed, fingers typed, a search bar filled with his name. The first image that appeared. Malik Hartwell, arms crossed, standing confidently on the cover of Aviation Week in front of a sleek private hangar. Another showed him seated beside Imani Sterling, CEO of Skylux Airlines, at a leadership roundtable. The headline below read, "Redefining Flight, Inside the Mind of Aviation's Quietest Power Broker." Up near the front, Avery Sloan hadn't noticed the shift. At first, she was busy checking galley supplies, issuing descent instructions, and smiling at VIPs like Mr. Hollis in 1B. But then the murmurs rose, soft at first, then undeniable. Eyes stopped following her. They began drifting toward the back, to row 7C, to him. She turned. Passengers stared, some with open mouths, others holding up phones, showing images to their seatmates. Her stomach twisted. "What's going on?" she asked, pulling Jonah aside. The junior attendant blinked, startled, then leaned in. "That guy, the one you moved. They're saying he's one of the airline's top investors." Avery froze. "What?" she said too sharply. Jonah nodded. "His name's Malik Hartwell. People are saying he saved Skylux after the pandemic. He's all over the internet." She stood there, clipboard in hand, lips drawn into a tight line. The color drained from her face as she turned back toward the cabin. Malik hadn't moved. He sat exactly as he had the whole flight, shoulders straight, gaze steady, staring into clouds outside the window. Only now, everything around him had changed. The air was different, no longer heavy with exclusion, now charged with realization. He was no longer a nameless inconvenience. He was a revelation. And they all knew it. At the front of the cabin, Avery's movements became sharp, hesitant. The confident grace she'd worn all flight had been replaced with cautious steps, like someone walking barefoot through broken glass. She tried to contain it, tried to explain. "There are a lot of black businessmen," she said flatly to Jonah when he showed her the image. Could be anyone, but when he zoomed in, when she saw the handshake with Imani Sterling, the company logo behind him, her breath hitched. Just once. And that was all it took. Before the aircraft reached the gate, the intercom buzzed. But this time, it wasn't the captain, and it wasn't Avery. It was a deeper, corporate voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop. A representative from Skylux Executive Operations will be boarding momentarily. We appreciate your patience." The words rippled down the aisle like thunder. In row 5, a man leaned toward the window. "Is that a black car pulling up?" A woman near the front adjusted her scarf and whispered, "Is that for him?" They didn't need to say who. They knew. Avery's face went pale. Her clipboard trembled in her hands. She stepped into the galley, hiding behind the curtain, trying to breathe. Behind her, passengers were retrieving their phones, refreshing their screens, searching, scrolling, showing each other the man they had ignored. One even mouthed, "We messed up." Then the door opened. Two figures stepped on board. One wore a tailored navy blazer, a Skylux operations badge gleaming on his chest. The other held a slim black tablet. They moved quickly with quiet authority. Their eyes scanned the crew. Then the man spoke, his voice calm, unwavering. "Avery Sloan?" She turned slowly, her smile brittle, collapsing under the weight of what was coming. "Yes," she said, voice suddenly small. He handed her a printed letter. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of in-flight duty pending internal investigation. Please surrender your badge, uniform ID, and service wings." Gasps rippled through the front rows. Avery's jaw locked, but she complied. First the nameplate, then the ID badge, tugged from her lanyard. Finally, the silver Skylux wings, pinned neatly above her heart. Her fingers trembled as she unfastened them. What is this about?" she whispered, trying to salvage control. The man didn't blink. An executive-level passenger was mishandled during your flight. We have multiple reports and photographic evidence. She tried to speak again, but no one was listening. The truth had landed before the plane ever did. There's photographic evidence. A formal statement will follow. The man didn't wait for a reply. He turned before Avery Sloan could argue. Two other attendants, Jonah and Devon, were approached next. Their faces fell as they were quietly pulled aside and instructed to disembark for debriefing. The third crew member, Lena, a soft-spoken attendant who had offered Malik nothing more than a glance, was left untouched. She looked at him now with wide, guilty eyes, but she still said nothing. Passengers began rising, retrieving bags, but the energy had shifted. Movements were slower, more careful, like the cabin itself was holding its breath. In 3A, a man muttered, "We should have said something." Another nodded solemnly. That was hard to watch. Malik Hartwell rose calmly. He didn't rush, didn't posture. He simply gathered his carry-on, dry now, but still bearing faint orange stains, then gently slid his ruined laptop into a padded sleeve. As he stepped into the aisle, passengers instinctively moved aside, not out of fear, but out of respect. They had misjudged him. Now they were witnessing the weight of who he was. Just outside the jet bridge, a man waited. Three-piece suit, Skylux crest stitched into the lapel. He stepped forward and extended his hand. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm Daniel Reyes, Director of Corporate Compliance. On behalf of Skylux, I want to extend our deepest apologies. Ground transport is waiting for you. The CEO will be in contact within the hour." Then he handed over a sleek black envelope stamped with the company's silver seal. Inside, a personal handwritten letter from Imani Sterling, CEO of Skylux. "I heard what happened," Reyes added, his voice low. "There's no excuse. The board's already seen the footage. The response will be decisive." Malik accepted the envelope with a nod. His face didn't soften, didn't harden. It was unreadable, but composed, still. But this time his posture shifted. He walked not just with dignity, but with gravity. Minutes later, while baggage tumbled onto carousels and Avery Sloan sat alone in a windowless airport room clutching her removed nameplate, Skylux's digital channels pushed out a message. App notifications, website banners, social media feeds. A gray screen faded into the face of Imani Sterling, calm, clear, unflinching. Skylux Airlines was built on the principle that luxury should never be reserved for the few, but should be a promise to all. Today, we failed that promise. On Flight 308, Mr. Malik Hartwell, a respected investor, advisor, and above all, a passenger, was subjected to treatment that violated not only our policy, but our values. Let me be absolutely clear. No individual, regardless of their appearance, background, or seat assignment, should be made to justify their right to dignity. We are ashamed, and we are taking action. The video spread fast. Within hours, it was picked up by every major outlet. Clips went viral. Captions echoed across the internet. Not just a passenger. The man who saved the airline, humiliated on his own plane. Silence isn't neutrality. When Malik returned to his downtown office days later, the skyline stretched endlessly outside his window. But something had changed, not just in public perception, but in institutional behavior. What happened aboard Flight 308 was no longer just a story. It had become a symbol of how quickly power can shift, of how easily quiet prejudice can unravel under the weight of undeniable truth. Skylux moved swiftly. An independent ethics committee was formed. They launched a full audit, starting with their frontline operations. Within 72 hours, the findings were damning. Avery Sloan, once considered a model senior attendant, had a history carefully buried under vague write-ups and behind-door warnings. The audit uncovered 2 prior incidents. An elderly black couple on a New York to London flight reassigned without cause, publicly embarrassed over a ticketing error that was later proven false. A South Asian entrepreneur removed from business class under the excuse of an aggressive tone. Multiple passengers testified he'd been polite and soft-spoken. Both had filed informal complaints. Neither had been escalated until now. The committee found a pattern, a motive, a name. The board responded, not with a PR spin, not with vague statements, but with action. Avery Sloan wasn't just terminated, she was blacklisted. An industry-wide notice was issued through the Airline Conduct Registry, a rarely used but powerful protocol. It barred her from working with any FAA-certified carrier. Her staff ID was revoked, her access erased, her pension frozen pending legal review. She would never wear wings again. There were no press releases from Avery Sloan, no teary videos, no defense posted to social media. When the formal notice arrived, it was said she simply folded it once, set it aside, and said nothing. Because Vindication, in its truest form, didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be undeniable. Malik Hartwell didn't speak to the media. He didn't make statements on talk shows or appear on magazine covers. Instead, he showed up, 7 days later, at a long-scheduled Skylux Leadership Summit, held behind closed doors. The room was filled with executives, investors, policy leaders, many of whom had once shaken his hand without ever truly seeing him. When he walked in, he didn't need to be introduced. No spotlight, no announcement, just presence. He stepped onto the low stage without ceremony, adjusted the microphone once, and let the room settle. Then, with clarity, not anger, he began. A week ago, I was in 7C. By the lavatory, orange juice drying on a broken laptop. Spoken to like a disruption, not a person. He let the silence carry the weight of the truth. I didn't say who I was, because I shouldn't have had to. Respect should never be tied to resumes or reputation. Dignity shouldn't be conditional. Some lowered their eyes. Others nodded slowly. He continued. I've built companies, negotiated mergers, sat on advisory boards, but none of that followed me into that cabin. What happened reminded many, how easily worth is questioned when the wrapping doesn't match expectation. He paused again, not to dramatize, just to breathe. I don't want people to fear my position. I want them to recognize my humanity and the humanity of others who don't have my resources to defend themselves. When the applause came, it didn't burst. It rolled, slow and steady, like rain after drought. A full, standing recognition, not for a title, but for the truth. In the days that followed, Skylux implemented sweeping internal reforms. Mandatory bias and empathy training for all cabin staff. New escalation protocols designed to prevent seat-level profiling. And the creation of a passenger advocacy division, reporting not to supervisors, but directly to the board. They offered Malik a permanent role on the oversight committee. He declined, not out of bitterness, but out of principle. If fairness only works when someone powerful is watching, he told Imani Sterling in a private follow-up, then it's not a system, it's performance. He returned to his work quietly. Back to business, back to mentorship, back to the young professionals who still met with him monthly. But something had shifted, not in him, but around him. When people saw him now, they didn't just see an executive. They saw a man who had been mistreated and didn't lose himself in proving them wrong. A man who held his silence like a shield until the world was ready to listen. He never spoke Avery's name, not publicly, not privately. When asked by a colleague if he planned to pursue legal action, he simply shook his head. What would that fix? My goal was never revenge. It was truth. And so the story didn't close with arrests or outrage. It closed with something quieter. A return of dignity, of decency, of the truth placed gently back where it belonged. That human worth cannot, must not, be measured by seat assignment, skin tone, or silence in the face of cruelty. It must be honored from the moment you walk through the gate to the moment your flight touches down.